The fluorescent lights of the gym at Fort Moore hummed against the early morning quiet, casting a sharp glow over the iron bars, heavy sleds, and medicine balls laid out across the concrete floor. Captain Jessica Vance stood near the starting line, adjusting the gloves on her hands while taking a slow, steady breath. Around her, dozens of soldiers from the 11th Infantry Regiment were chalking their hands and lacing up their boots. Today was the first full-unit trial of the Army Combat Fitness Test, the Pentagon's highly touted, gender-neutral experiment designed to replace decades of simple push-ups and sit-ups with absolute battlefield readiness. The philosophy behind the new test was straightforward. The battlefield doesn't care about your demographic. Pulling a wounded comrade from a burning vehicle or hauling heavy ammo crates across a fire-swept zone requires raw physical output, regardless of who is performing the task. For Jessica, a logistics officer who had spent her entire military career outperforming expectations, the concept of a single, universal physical bar was something she welcomed. She had trained for months, trading long-distance runs for heavy deadlifts, weighted sled drags, and explosive medicine ball throws. As the air horn sounded to begin the first event, the energy inside the facility transformed into high-octane chaos. Soldiers grunted under the weight of heavy barbells, sprinted until their lungs burned, and dragged loaded sleds across the turf. But as the morning wore on, the initial atmosphere of fierce motivation began to give way to an undeniable, uncomfortable tension. Across the rows of lanes, clear operational patterns started to emerge right in front of the cadre's eyes. While male soldiers in heavy combat specialties easily cleared the maximum thresholds, highly capable female officers and specialized support personnel were visibly struggling with specific events, particularly the explosive overhead throw and the grueling leg tuck. Jessica finished her lanes with sweat stinging her eyes, glancing down the line to see capable, dedicated soldiers facing total evaluation failure on events that favored raw upper body leverage over tactical endurance. What was advertised as a seamless unification of military standards was rapidly turning into an institutional collision course. Within days of the initial testing cycle at Fort Moore, the quiet tension inside the gym erupted into a full-scale policy debate that reached the highest halls of the Pentagon. Reports from units across the country began trickling into Human Resources Command, depicting a stark operational reality. Capable female soldiers, non-commissioned officers, and support specialists who had served honorably on multiple combat deployments were suddenly facing administrative flags, promotion halts, and potential separation, not because of poor leadership or tactical incompetence, but due to the rigid mechanics of a single physical evaluation. Inside the battalion headquarters, Captain Vance found herself caught between two opposing philosophies. On one side were the traditional combat arms commanders, who argued that lowering any standard for any reason directly compromised squad lethality. To them, if a soldier couldn't haul a 40-pound sled or complete the leg tuck requirement under optimal conditions on base, they had no business being in a frontline combat unit. Physical capability in a war zone was an absolute binary. You could either move the weight, or people died. On the other side were logistical planners, medical officers, and personnel strategists who pointed out a catastrophic flaw in the system. The high rate of test failures among women wasn't just affecting infantry units, it was threatening to drain the military of critical talent in intelligence, cyber warfare, aviation, and medical support, branches where physical strength was secondary to specialized technical skills. Furthermore, physical therapy clinics on bases nationwide reported a massive spike in stress fractures and soft tissue injuries as soldiers rushed to train for heavy power lifts without proper strength conditioning pipelines. The breaking point arrived during a brigade-level briefing, where senior leadership laid out the impending career consequences for those failing the new evaluation. Sitting in the back row, Jessica watched as highly qualified female pilots and intelligence analysts stared at the screen in disbelief. The test, designed to build a stronger army, was instead threatening to purge some of its most valuable minds. The Pentagon realized it was standing on a razor's edge, preserve the absolute purity of the combat standard, or adapt to save the force from self-inflicted paralysis. The pressure on Capitol Hill finally boiled over into public congressional hearings. Behind closed doors in Washington, senior Army leaders were forced to confront independent analytical reports showing that the blanket, gender-neutral scoring scale was producing catastrophic failure rates among female service members across all branches. The dream of a single, unyielding physical bar had collided head-on with human physiology and institutional retention. Under intense political and legislative scrutiny, the Pentagon executed a series of sudden, chaotic policy pivots. First, they tried introducing alternative exercises, swapping out the infamous leg tuck for the plank. Then came the most controversial change of all, abandoning the single gender-neutral scoring chart in favor of age and gender-adjusted percentile bands. The physical events themselves remained identical for everyone, but the score required to pass was now scaled based on who was performing it. Back at Fort Moore, the announcement sent shockwaves through the barracks. Captain Vance stood near the bulletin board as her squad read the newly posted scoring tables. Instead of resolving the crisis, the sudden shift opened a brand-new rift inside the unit. For many male soldiers, the split scoring system felt like a betrayal of the original premise, breeding quiet resentment and accusations that the military was compromising true combat readiness for political expediency. For female officers like Jessica, the change felt patronizing and bitter. They had spent over 3 years training relentlessly to meet the absolute standard, only to have the goalposts moved right as they proved their capability, leaving their achievements forever questioned by skeptical peers. The attempt to fix the ACFT had inadvertently created a culture war in the motor pools and training grounds. The core question remained unanswered. Was the military's primary duty to enforce absolute physical equality based on the brutal reality of combat, or to adapt its standards to build a diverse, sustainable modern fighting force? Jessica walked out onto the physical training field that morning, feeling the weight of a unit divided not by enemy fire, but by the very system designed to train them. The atmosphere inside the 11th Infantry Regiment shifted from open friction to a quiet, focused truce as the unit prepared for its final pre-deployment evaluation. The political shouting matches in Washington and the toxic internet debates didn't matter anymore. The deployment orders were cut, and the squad was heading to an austere operating environment where every single soldier had to pull their own weight. Captain Jessica Vance decided to address the elephant in the room the only way she knew how, through shared sweat and practical execution. Instead of arguing over percentile charts or policy memos, she organized joint tactical readiness drills that mirrored actual combat scenarios. They loaded weighted stretchers, dragged full-size dummies through mud trenches, and cleared simulated obstacles under full kit. It was during these high-intensity field exercises that the rigid debate over test scores began to dissolve into real-world operational reality. When a heavy equipment vehicle got bogged down during a midnight repositioning drill, it wasn't a single powerlifter who solved the problem. It was a coordinated effort, the explosive strength of the heavy combat arms soldiers pushing the frame, combined with Jessica's precise logistical maneuvering and rapid crisis management under pressure. The squad realized that while physical strength was non-negotiable for survival, combat effectiveness was an ecosystem of complementary skills. Raw upper body leverage meant nothing if the tactical plan was flawed, and brilliant strategy meant nothing if no one could carry the ammo. As the unit lined up on the fog-covered field for their final official record test under the revised standards, the atmosphere was markedly different from the chaos of 2 years prior. The revised ACFT was no longer seen as a magic bullet or an absolute moral judgment. It had settled into what it was always supposed to be, a blunt, evolving tool for physical conditioning. Jessica stepped up to the deadlift bar, her team shouting encouragement behind her. She grabbed the steel, drove through her heels, and locked out the weight. They were no longer testing an abstract policy experiment. They were preparing for war. 6 months into their deployment in a remote, high-altitude operating base, the endless debates over the ACFT finally faced their ultimate test, reality. When an unexpected supply convoy was ambushed along a rugged mountain pass, Captain Jessica Vance's team was dispatched as part of the Quick Reaction Force. Under intense conditions and steep terrain, every soldier executed their duties without hesitation, hauling gear, clearing obstacles, and securing the perimeter in a seamless display of tactical cohesion. The battlefield did not ask who had passed the test under which percentile table. It only demanded that the work get done. The unit returned to base bruised and exhausted, but fully intact. The ultimate conclusion to the Army Combat Fitness Test saga is a pragmatist's lesson in military evolution. Pure physical metrics are essential, but true military readiness is built on a complex matrix of strength, intelligence, adaptability, and mutual trust. The Pentagon's multi-year struggle to balance gender neutrality with operational lethality revealed that no single standardized test can perfectly capture the full spectrum of modern warfare. While physical standards must remain high to meet the brutal demands of frontline combat, a modern armed force cannot afford to measure its total combat effectiveness purely through the lens of a powerlifter's gym session. By continuously refining the ACFT, the military proved that adapting to the realities of human physiology and specialized roles isn't a sign of weakness. It is the hallmark of a resilient, forward-thinking organization. Jessica stood on the airfield as the dust kicked up by a landing transport helicopter swept over her squad. Her boots were worn, her team was battle-tested, and the debate that had once threatened to pull her unit apart was now just an echo from the past. They had proven that when the standard is clear and the purpose is shared, the force doesn't break, it adapts, integrates, and moves forward together.